All right, so as Dr. Baker mentioned, my name is Naomi Simmons-Thorne, research assistant here at OCCRL. So today I was supposed to be presenting with another colleague of mine, Jewel Bourne, but Jewel was summoned by the California State Legislature, so she won't be able to make it with us. But we are really proud of Jewel, and there'll be further opportunities in the future to engage with Jewel, myself, and other OCCRL colleagues. In activities, in webinars, and other public engagement opportunities like this one. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our Engaging Partners webinar. It's the fourth webinar and the last webinar in our CLNA webinar series. And we want to be mindful of your time. So if we can get you in and out in a reasonable time, that would be great. So I want to go ahead and get us started. So we can give you all the information that we have for you and hear back from you as well at the end of our webinar today. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our first slide, which is our land acknowledgement. And so as a land grant institution here at the University of Illinois, it's important that we give our land grant acknowledgement. And this acknowledgement just states that the University of Illinois operates on the ancestral lands of the Peoria, Kaskasaki, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. And we have a responsibility here at the University of Illinois to acknowledge these Native nations and to work with them as we move forward as a vibrant, inclusive institution. So with that land grant acknowledgement, I'll also talk a little bit more narrowly about our mission here at OCCRL. And so our mission here is to strengthen pathways for all students through research and leadership. And there are four components and four ways that we affect that mission. One of those things are transformative leadership. The other is comprehensive P20 educational pathways, equity-driven change, and of course, public engagement opportunities like the CLNA webinar that you all are here for today. So as mentioned earlier, this is the last and the final webinar in our CLNA webinar series. We've had three of them beforehand. One of them was centering equity. That was our first one. In this webinar, what we focused on was equity gaps in CTE programs. And offered tools and resources for addressing those equity gaps. Webinar 2 was about culturally relevant pedagogy and support. And with this webinar, we wanted to focus on providing main findings and practices related to culturally relevant pedagogy, and also providing practitioners with reflective practices that they could integrate into their own work. Utilizing data was our third webinar, which really focused on descriptive case studies that were used as models to discuss and go over some data analysis and interpretation skills, specifically from an equity and asset-based perspective. And today is our last webinar in the series, Engaging Partners, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into our presentation here. So before we actually delve into the webinar, though, I just want to make you all aware, if you are not aware about of it yet, about our YouTube page at youtube.com/the OCCRL, where you can find various kinds of video content, including past entries from our CLNA webinar series. Two of those, the second and the third, were not able to go up on the website because there was some sensitive data in them, but the first one is already up there, which I have shown right here on the screen, and this one will go up there as well. If there's any information that we go over today that you want to go back and look at, or if you want to send this to a colleague, and additionally, if you want to check out our Centering Equity webinar as well, so that's available for you too. So be sure to check those out and stay tuned for this webinar when this one goes up as well. All right. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the webinar that we're here for today, which is engaging partners. So with this webinar, what we're going to be doing is delving into section 5 of the Community Local Needs Assessment, or CLNA, which deals with labor market alignment. And we have 4 things that we want to tackle and address while we are here in this webinar today. One of those things is identifying labor needs and opportunities. So we want to talk about how to do that and how to complete that component of the CLNA. We want to talk about how to define and plan for industry engagement, how to address equity gaps, and how to tap into career and opportunity clusters when you use your CLNA data, trying to figure out how we can tap into those program areas where we might not have any offerings or programming to ensure labor market alignment. And we have 3 objectives associated with these topics that we'll cover. One, we want to talk about and share best practices that are going on around and throughout the state. We want to highlight some statewide CLNA trends and patterns. And we want to help institutions, of course, actually be able to address the labor market needs that are arising in their regions and in their service areas. So that's the scope of our webinar for today. And what we'll do now is kind of start getting into that content. Right. So I know that you all, of course, are industry experts and leaders and experts in your various areas. And so I know I don't need to talk a whole lot about the CLNA and what it is, but I'll just, for the sake of setting the stage, just talk a little bit about the what and why of the CLNA. And so the CLNA, of course, is related to Perkins funding, and recipients of Perkins funding are required to conduct a comprehensive local needs assessment, or CLNA, which involves gathering and analyzing data to address and plan for the educational workforce needs of their local communities. But for our focus today, our focus is a little bit more limited. We don't want to deal with the CLNA in its entirety. What we want to focus on today specifically is engaging partners in section 5 of the Community Local Needs Assessment. And we want to focus on engaging partners specifically because engaging partners is vital and crucial to every step of the CLNA process, including section 5. And so when we're talking about engaging partners, what we're talking about here is first, collaborating with community partners to gather the data that the CLNA requires, and also collaborating with community partners to serve the function of addressing the workforce needs based on that data that you gather. So that's what we mean by engaging partners, and the kinds of partners that we want to focus on engaging today includes nonprofit and community-based organizations who can assist with both of those components of the CLNA. We want to talk about workforce planners and different agencies that can provide data related to these topics. And lastly, we want to talk about engaging industry partners like employers and commercial ventures that are going to help your students, of course, become and graduate workforce ready. And we're going to be looking at these topics specifically through a work-based learning lens, broadly construed. And so work-based learning is just going to refer to all the ways that community colleges provide their students opportunities to engage and interact with industry experts. So touching on that component of labor market alignment. And the reason we want to focus on work-based learning is because work-based learning is a proven way and a best practice strategy for ensuring that our programs and offerings are labor market aligned, and also that our students are graduating career ready. So that's the scope of our webinar. And what we'll do now is specifically move on to start talking about section 5 of the CLNA. So as I mentioned, section 5 of the CLNA is about labor market alignment, and labor market alignment um, is simply our effort to ensure that our programs are offering students relevant workforce experience and that the programs that we're offering are relevant to the workforce trends and economic trends in our various service areas. And this is important, of course, because we want to ensure that our students are graduating workforce ready. And we want to make sure that they can take advantage of those opportunities that are in their area. And so CLNA Section 5 because it's comprised of 7 prompts, and those, 11 prompts, and those 11 prompts require us to do 2 different things. First, it requires us to gather, analyze, and report data on local workforce needs and equity gaps. And secondly, to share with ICCB how our institutions are responding to workforce and equity trends. And how we're doing that already, and also how we will do that in the future. So today's workshop about engaging partners is relevant to the scope of Section 5 because once again, engaging partners is vital and crucial to both aspects of completing Section 5, both the gathering data component, the addressing the findings from the data that you gather, and also improving the programs and the offerings that your institution has for your students. And so what we'll be doing with our webinar is focusing on ways that institutions can and are going about gathering that data, and ways that institutions can respond and enhance their offerings based on the data that they're gathering. And so Section 5 of the CLNA has 3 basic question categories. And so we'll be covering um, ways of engaging partners relevant to those 3 different topics. And those 3 topics, again, are gathering data on local workforce needs, identifying collaboration partners, and third, addressing gaps in pre-existing CLNA related programming. So we're going to break our information over those 3 sections, and we're going to start with the first section, which is gathering data on local workforce needs. All right. So gathering data on regional and economic trends is important to completing the CLNA and providing the information that it requires. And because the CLNA requires us to provide information related to this, it is imperative, of course, that institutions know how to gather, analyze, and interpret economic and workforce-related trends data. But for the purposes for this workshop, what we really want to do is just to show how engaging partners can come in handy when completing this section of the CLNA. And so it's not necessary that institutions are going out and collecting original and primary data. There are partners out there, workforce planners and others who are already collecting and monitoring this data. So what we are trying to do is connect you with those partners and showing you how they can be engaged and how their data can be leveraged towards completing the CLNA. All right. So our recommendation when it comes to engaging workforce planners is really just consulting with this data and this information so that your institutions, of course, doesn't have to recreate the wheel. And so because there are agencies already out there gathering and monitoring data related to economic trends and workforce development, CLNA preparers can just tap into those pre-existing data sets, and it's not required that institutions and preparers will go out there and collect this primary data and original data on their own. And so what we want to show you is kind of who those partners are, who you can consult, and where you can find their resources, and also how you can engage them. Right. So right here on the screen, we have 2 partners and resources that preparers definitely should know, and that you can consult as you're completing Section 5 of that CLNA. One of those resources is the Local Workforce Innovation Area Map, and the other one is the Economic Development Regions Map. So the LWIA is provided by the Illinois WorkNet Center, and the way that it works is that every community college is located in one of the regions. And what you would do is you'd go to the website and go to your region, and there you could find information and data about economic trends and resources for each cluster region. And this information would be you'd be able to plug right into the CLNA when they're asking you about workforce and labor development trends in your area. And the economic development regions map works very similarly. This one is provided by the Illinois Department of Economic Security, and it breaks regions in the state into 10 different economic development regions. And similarly to the WorkNet map, it also provides data about industries and economic trends in each region. And so for both of these things, they're really helpful because they allow you to get a bird's eye view of development trends that are already existing in your area. And this information can be easily integrated and plugged into the CLNA Section 5 and can also be used to plan how your institution will address its labor market alignment requirements. So in addition to those two resources that we talked about, the local workforce initiative area map and the economic development regions map, there are also community-based organizations that we can engage when it comes to completing Section 5 of the CLNA. So every, or at least most counties, have a designated economic development organization or an EDO. So Vermilion Advantage, for example, is the EDO for Vermilion County. And EDOs provide very similar information to the information that you could get from the um, LWIA or EDR maps. And so you can consult these community-based organizations to learn about workforce developments, economic trends, and also to consult with them about labor market alignment. Another interesting and I think important way to gather some of this data can also come through state and federal grants and funding. And so as state legislatures and as the federal government passes legislation and policies that are geared towards stimulating or revitalizing various kinds of industries. This kind of clues you into economic trends and workforce development trends that are kind of happening in your area, in your region. And so here is a good example with the CEGA legislation that Illinois has passed. And this funding came from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. So Richland County, Richland Community College is a institution that gets funds from CEGA legislation. And so this would, Richland County, Richland Community College, for example, could use this information to say, there is new funding coming into our area dedicated to this specific workforce cluster. And this is one way that our institution is using funds in developing programming to address this workforce development. So federal grants and state grants can also kind of clue you into economic and workforce needs developing in your area as well. All right. So after we go into this process, of course, of gathering that information that CLNA requires of us about workforce and economic trends, it's also important that we answer the question about and determine who are the partners that we actually need to engage. And so the CLNA is, of course, in ICCB is going to ask for a roadmap about whether your institution is labor market aligned and how you plan to become so or do so in the future. And so what we really want to talk about here is how an institution makes that determination about are is our programs labor market aligned? And if so, if not, how do we get there? And so here we have kind of two broad-based suggestions about coming to that determination. And so ICCB has its own suggestions that it includes on the CLNA that you can, of course, use and consult as you're completing Section 5. It talks about consulting with workforce development boards, attending Chamber of Commerce meetings where you can meet industry leaders and business owners. It also talks about consulting with unions. But another development we've seen is the increasing use of program gap analysis to also come to the determination about labor market alignment. And so program gap analysis is kind of like a comprehensive assessment usually done by market researchers, but it can also be done in-house. In program gap analysis is an empirical tool and an analytic that institutions can use to um, come to the determination about whether or not their programs and offerings are labor market aligned, and if not, how can they become so in the future? And so, like I mentioned, program gap analysis is usually done by market researchers, but it can also be done in-house. Some of the organizations that institutions have been collaborating with to conduct these PGAs includes organizations like EMIS and also Lightcast. Those are two industry partners that institutions are collaborating with to kind of gather this information and make determinations about whether their programs are labor market aligned. So, with that said, this is the information that I've shared thus far. All of this is related to this section, question category 1 in the CLNA, and that's about gathering the data about workforce and development trends in your area. But what we're going to do now is switch gears just a tiny bit to talk about what comes after that data collection process. So once you gather that information, how to actually address the data once it's collected. All right. So here we're going to talk a little bit about defining your scope of engagement. And when we say defining your scope of engagement, what we're saying here is determining how you will engage industry partners to ensure your programs and offerings are labor market aligned. Right. So, of course, after we know what industries that we need to engage in order to become labor market aligned, of course, it's important to define the appropriate level of engagement for these industries in the context of your institution. So, I think a common misconception about labor market alignment is that it's a one-size-fit-all policy, or that there's only one way to ensure that labor market alignment is happening, and that's just not the case. So um, there's a continuum of engagements, and it's important that every institution is staking out a level of engagement that is a best fit for them in terms of their student interests and the resources that they have. And that's really going to be a unique fit for every institution. And that's not only going to look different from institution to institution, but it's also going to look different for the industry that you're trying to engage. And so engaging industry partners, for example, from machine technology is going to look a little different from engaging industry partners in early childhood education. So another thing to stress is that labor market alignment does not always mean establishing a new program or a new program area. So as I mentioned, there is a continuum of engagement strategies. We're going to talk a little bit about that next. But there is a continuum of labor market, of industry engagement strategies, and which one is going to be best for your institution is going to depend on contextual factors like your student interest level and the resources of your college. So this means that there, of course, are different ways for institutions to meet the CLNA labor market alignment requirements, and those ways are going to be unique to institutions based on various kinds of contextual factors that we talked about. And so as you're kind of staking out what your engagement is going to be, we have some questions here for your institution to think about. So questions like, what is feasible for our institution? What is the student interest level for a specific industry or a specific program? What firms and agencies can we partner with, and how? what specific outcomes are we hoping to achieve through this partnership? What resources are required to reach that outcome? How much time will they need to commit? And how much time will we need to commit? And how will that success be measured? So those are all important considerations when planning for labor market alignment. And we want to now kind of talk about those different levels of engagement and what it means to actually make to stake out a level of engagement that is unique and tailored to your institution. So what we have here is a model to kind of help you conceptualize the different levels of engagement, the nature and scope of those engagements, and also like the various sorts of programming activities institutions can adopt pursuant to labor market alignment. So if your institution does a program gap analysis, for example, and you discover that precision machining or another area is a growing industry in your area, but you currently don't have any programming related to this industry, you can consult this model to decide how to align your offerings with respect to student interest in college resources in a way that's going to become a best fit for your institution. So that might mean, for example, staking out a level one engagement where you are doing career awareness activities like career days or career fairs. That might mean looking at a level two engagement where you're doing career exploration activities like worksite tours or job shadowings. And maybe perhaps your institution has resources and the student interest to go full throttle, and you want to do a level three kind of engagement where we're talking about offering a new program or perhaps starting a certified internship program. But whatever you decide, the principle here to take away from this is just that there isn't any one size fit all policy when it comes to labor market alignment. And labor market alignment does not always mean starting a new program. So there is a spectrum between starting a program and in making your students aware of various kinds of careers that they can opt into or pursue after graduation. Um, we also provided a resource here for you to learn a little bit more about the work-based learning continuum, and you can find that on the Illinois State Board of Education's website under the title Work-Based Learning Manual. All right. So lastly, in this section on engaging industry partners for labor market alignment, we want to talk a little bit about how to recruit partners. And so the last thing we need to touch on here is when you decide which industries you want to engage and you decide on a scope of engagement that's appropriate for your institution, how do you actually go about reaching out to these industry partners? How do you go about actually establishing these relationships and developing programming that your students can benefit from? So because of our time constraints, we obviously can't delve into this as deeply as I think many of us would like to. But if this is something that you all are interested in, please let us know in our feedback survey, and perhaps this is something that we can explore in the future as well. But I did provide some tips here for you just to kind of get you started, and also additional resources to provide you with more information about recruiting partners. And so some of those tips and strategies includes peer-to-peer outreach. So many of us as professionals, we have people in our network who work in various capacities, who work across various industries, and it's not uncommon for representatives from community colleges to draw on their pre-existing peer-to-peer networks to begin facilitating some of these collaborations. We also talked about Chamber of Commerce meetings, and so at these meetings, you can find labor leaders, industry leaders from your area, and you can have one-on-one conversations that can lead to industry collaborations. And also you can start with low stakes engagements as well. So things like inviting employers to speak at your institution, asking employers to offer tours to your students, so things like this. We also provided another manual here under the title Recruiting Strategies that you can consult from the Illinois State Board of Education that provides a little bit more information about recruiting strategies. But as I mentioned, this is something that we're definitely passionate about, and if it's something that you all be interested in, please let us know, and perhaps we can revisit this topic more in depth at a later date. All right. So the last category, question category that you'll find in the CLNA are questions related to addressing equity. And so for this question category, it's all about ensuring that institutions are identifying pre-existing equity gaps and also developing and sharing plans with ICCB pertaining to how your institution will plan to address those equity gaps. Um, so what we'll kind of focus on for this section in particular is understanding statewide patterns and trends as it pertains to CLNA related equity gaps, and offering a few resources individuals and institutions can engage, consult, and also cite in their section 5 of their in the equity section of their section 5s. Right. So the reason we are focusing on statewide CLNA related equity patterns and trends is because how challenging equity reporting can be. Um, Institutions report having challenges with gathering the information that is relevant to equity gap reporting, and also sometimes not knowing what information to look for exactly. And so these challenges have led some colleges to report that their institutions have no equity gaps in their CLNAs, and we know that that is not the case. We know that as much energy, effort, and that we put into our programming and our offerings, we know that no institution is perfect and there's always room for improvement. And so the question is more so about figuring out what those equity gaps are. Um, and so our view is that understanding state CLNA related equity patterns and trends can help improve the equity reporting process because it gives preparers insights about what they should be looking for in groups that they might need to keep an eye on. So what we're going to do here is just talk about some of the three main statewide CLNA related equity gaps that institutions are reporting, and hopefully this will give some insight into um, equity gaps that your institutions should be paying attention to if these are not coming up in your data already. But those equity gaps are the fact that graduates are experiencing gender and race-based pay and hiring gaps when they leave our programs. Students are also facing financial hardships while they're in our programs, and English language learners and students with disabilities are having challenges accessing and completing our programs. So in addition to the pre-existing gaps your institutions might have already identified and might already be addressing, these are just some additional ones to be on the lookout for if they're not coming up in the data that you're already collecting. All right. So here is just a little bit more information, a little bit more insight about the nature and details of these equity gaps that we just talked about. So in terms of gender and race-based pay and hiring gaps, colleges around the state are reporting that they're seeing racial disparities in hiring post-graduation. And truck driving, for example, has been noted as one of those industries. We are also seeing pay differentials existing across racial and ethnic lines. And we also know that industries that have high female representation also generally pay lower as well. In terms of financial hardships, colleges are reporting that students are struggling to find transportation, both pre and post graduation, struggling to find childcare, which is really important, both while they're in our institutions and also while they graduate. Financial hardship is also coming in the form of students being unable to come out of pocket for work attire. So, in some industries, students have to have certain kinds of uniforms or certain kind of work attire that they have to report to work with, and some of that requires students coming out of pocket, and that can be cost prohibitive for some students. Um, and also work equipment. So, for example, if a student is going into auto mechanics, sometimes it's required that a student will pay for their own tools, and those things can be cost prohibitive for students. And so, these are some of the financial hardships and equity gaps related to income and wealth that we're seeing being reported across the state. And lastly, as I mentioned, was just issues related to accessibility and program completion rates for English language learners, and also our students with disabilities. And so what we're going to do next is just kind of address some of the resources that both institutions can um, uh, draw on, but also use pursuant to addressing equity gaps while completing CLNA Section 5. All right. So we have here two kind of broad-based recommendations. One is around identifying those gaps, and the other one is around addressing needs for English language learners and also students with disabilities. So, in terms of identifying gaps, one thing that we've seen institutions doing to learn more about equity issues in their institutions, if that information is not already coming up in the data that you're collecting, is doing things like surveys with an equity lens, administering those to students both pre and post graduation to see what challenges the students are experiencing and which students are experiencing those challenges, and also setting up focus groups to gain insights after students graduate. So kind of setting up a cohort model where the institution would reach out to members of that cohort and ask them about their experiences and observations in the various industries that they're leaving the college and going into. So these are some of the ways that the colleges are trying to gather some of this information about equity gaps, and also identifying what those equity gaps are. And then lastly, there are some information here about English language learners and students with disabilities and addressing and meeting their needs. And so what we're recommending here is that institutions consider partnering with agencies and nonprofits who can offer and supplement pre-existing college resources and programming. And so the Northwestern Illinois Center for Independent Living is one of those community-based organizations. And so they are always um, open and welcoming to collaborating with community colleges and institutions to address the needs of students with disabilities, but also trying out new pedagogical strategies and techniques as well. So, language upskilling is a pedagogical strategy that has been gaining steam recently. And what language upskilling is focused on is not only fluency for English language learners, but also domain specific fluency. So offering opportunities for English language learners to um, learn domain specific language that will be specific to their industry or specific to a skill set that they're interested in developing. So these are some of the resources that we've seen and resources that we thought you should know about as you are identifying those equity gaps, and also trying to figure out how your institutions will address them pursuant to completing Section 5 of the CLNA. All right, so That is all we have for you in terms of our webinar content. But what we want to do now is to create a forum where we can draw on some of the wisdom and expertise that's already in our virtual space, pursuant to tackling and addressing some of these issues and topics that we've touched on so far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and what we're going to do is a breakout group activity. So what we're going to do is I will split you all into 3 different groups, and I'll also send out a link that will have instructions and 3 slides on them. And in those slides, what you'll find is are 3 different scenarios, and you'll choose the scenario that corresponds to your group number. And what you're going to do is you and your group mates are going to look at the scenario, and it's going to provide you with a institution who is trying to engage a specific kind of industry partner. And what you're going to do is discuss amongst yourself how you would actually go about engaging that specific industry partner in the context of your scenario. And what we want to do is give you some time to just talk about that with your group. And then what we need to do is come back and share out some of the strategies that you discussed. Both in terms of your pre-existing expertise, but also any information that you found useful throughout the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now, and I will break you all up into groups, and I'll also come around just to hear some of your conversations and just get a chance to engage with you a little bit more in a one-to-one level. And then when we come back from our groups, we will share out and talk about conclusions and any questions you all might have about what we've shared with you today. All right, so I'm going to break you out into groups, and I will share the link. The link will appear in the chat for each group. Then we'll come back and we'll discuss what we've shared and talked about together with our group members. So we're really excited to hear what you have to say about these different scenarios, and also excited to give you an opportunity to share your information both with us and also the other participants who are here with us in the webinar. So if we can we have perhaps group 1? I know Yasmin, you were in there. If we can have perhaps someone from group 1 tell us a little bit about your scenario, the questions that you all were addressing, and a little bit about your conversation. That would be great.
Sure, I can share some of what we talked about. There were some technical issues in our group, so it was just me and Sarah, but it was definitely interesting to hear Sarah share her insights as a community college expert with me. We talked about the scenario 1, about the community college in Blue Valley and their partnership with a tech company for experiences like internships, workshops, collaborative projects. And something that was brought up was like the how much of that potential exists in like longer term collaborations for students, or longer term job opportunities for them, that would determine some of the decisions that the college maybe would be able to make. So that's what I remember from scenario 1. If Sarah, if I missed anything, please add, or if I misinterpreted. But I think it was a interesting conversation that we were having.
Yeah, no, you nailed that part of it. The only other thing I brought up is the fact that they say that the company specializes in cloud computing solutions and cybersecurity, and that the school has courses in 4 different areas. And so will those 2 cover all of the areas that they need it to cover for the like the software development students? Are they just kind of okay, now you're in cybersecurity internship, and that's not really what they want to do. So yeah, just kind of making sure it covers all the bases.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think one of the things that came up in you all's conversation was the what we talked about best fit and every institution having like a unique profile. And so the fact that engagement with industry engagements are going to look a little different for every institution. So thank you all so much for sharing that. And then I guess we'll go ahead and move to scenario two. I think Lisa was in this group. Lisa, if you're still here and if you don't mind, would you tell us a little bit about your scenario and the conversations that you all had? Are you able to share with us, Lisa? Okay, Lisa might not be able to share with us. All right, well, no worries. We'll go to our last group, which was group number three, and I believe Andrew and Robert was in this group. If either of you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit about your scenario and the conversations that you had about it?
Sure. What we talked about is they're considering expanding into their curriculum into urban farming and sustainable practices. At this point, it would have just been an idea. They really need to start looking into market research, not necessarily for economic market research, but whether or not this reaching out to local farm bureaus, talking to other institutions, finding out this thing has already been done somewhere else, whether or not the research they're looking for, look at curriculum options, certification options, finding out if any of those things even exist. So they would need to reach out to other organizations who may have done something similar to find out whether or not they're replicating their wheel or inventing the wheel.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, pretty helpful here as well because one of the things that we wanted to stress in this webinar was the fact that there's so much data out there, there's so many models out there, and as practitioners, I think, we are so involved in making our programs and institutions effective that it can be hard and difficult to always have to replicate the wheel or get primary or develop primary data. And so I think that was a really good conversation that touched on that theme of um, engagement, which would
Well, and also, I mean, they said there's
all about.
a recognized growing interest. Those aren't numbers. So they would need to do some sort of survey of the local population to find out whether or not this is really a thing before they invest a large of money into curriculum and staff. They need to know exactly how many students would be interested in this. It can't just be a recognized quantity. They need hard numbers.
Absolutely, and that goes back to the engaging partners. In order to do this work effectively at all levels of the CLNA, we have to like engage our partners, whether that's industry partners, individuals from the community, or workforce planners. Engaging partners, of course, is extremely important to this work and actually being effective in it. Right. Well, that is all that we have for you all today. And thank you so much for joining us. And so I just want to conclude saying that.
Naomi?
Mhm.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say one comment that was discussed in our group. Jody had some technical issues. She couldn't join us with audio, but she wrote some comments, and I think it totally was like referring to Andrew was saying. And it's a kind of a partnership. Yeah, it was like she was suggesting surveys done by the media department or the agroforestry department that would I think then be an answer to that need of numbers and data that you can then based on that um, have something to say. So it was interesting that the survey idea was also brought up by Jody. I just remembered, and because she wasn't able to share herself, I thought I want to share that. It was invaluable feedback from her.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing her comments with us, even though she wasn't able to give them to us. But thank you for bringing them in before we like wrap up and close out. Um, but I guess the last thing I'll say before we do close out is just that I think it's important for us to remember that CLNA Section 5 is all about identifying data in terms of workforce development and economic trends, addressing that data, and determining our scope of engagement based on the contextual factors of our institutions. And so I appreciate you all giving us some additional insights to consider in addition to what we offered for you here today. But that's all that we have for you. And as I mentioned, this webinar will go up online. And if there's anything that came up or anything that you'd like to kind of dialogue with us about, we're happy to do so. Please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is here, and also my contact information is on the OCCRL website, which we welcome you all to please visit. So please stay tuned for more webinar opportunities and other public engagement opportunities. And I'll just stick around just in case anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts that they want to share. But if not, it was a pleasure meeting with you all today and getting to hear from you too. And yeah, we're looking forward to getting another chance to engage you in the future. So thank you all so much for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us.